So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Grand Tack of the early solar system. And what is the Grand Tack? The Grand Tack is pretty much the chaotic history and the chaos that happened in the early solar system when we go back 4.6 billion years ago. So, what happened during that time? And how did that change the early solar system to what it is today? All right, so let's hop into the time machine and go back to the past. 4.6 billion years ago. So, first gen rocky planets were set up in a very small area between present day Mercury being only 0.4 and then to Mars being 1.5. So imagine having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rocky planets just taking up that small area. And this causes a lot of destruction in the early solar system where all these little planetesimals were colliding, fusing, or just outright being ejected right into the sun, or just being ejected, toward other planets, or just being ejected who knows where. And then all that destruction prompted the reducing number of these planetesimals. But it was also an outside force that was happening in the outer solar system. You see, when Jupiter was formed, because it was the first planet to form, Jupiter didn't have Saturn to pretty much, change and alter its orbit. Jupiter was just a cosmic wrecking ball that was wandering into the inner solar system, and then it wandered freely. And then when Saturn took over, it formed. Saturn had enough gravity to pull on Jupiter, from its inward migration. And then when Saturn started to come over, so it pulled Jupiter, and then it moved to its current position. But it just kept going and going and going until, early setbacks happened, and then the gravity became stronger. So that's where Jupiter is currently in its orbit as the fifth planet away from the sun. So this cosmic inward and outward migration caused by Jupiter and Saturn actually prompted what we call a 2-in-1 resonance, where for every 2 orbits by Jupiter, there's always 1 complete orbit around the sun by Saturn, combining with the 2-in-1. And see, these number of rocky planets reduce to a measly 10 rocky planets: Mercury, Venus, Theia, Earth, Mars, and several others, and it kept reducing as planets were starting to collide. We know that Earth has been in a collision with Theia. We don't really talk a lot about Mercury and Venus having collisions, or we've probably talked about Mars having collisions. There's another video we talked about when Mercury was involved in a collision that altered its size and its orbit. But we don't really talk about those collisions frequently, because all we know is about Earth's collision that formed the moon, because we brought back moon samples from the Apollo missions, prompting that how can an object that big form with less iron? Because when you need to make something that big, iron has to be present to form a moon about this size compared to the Earth. So we all know about the Grand Tack of the inner solar system. So what was going on in the outer solar system, including with the Grand Tack? Well, but also we can go to the barycenter too. Because actually, did you know that this Jupiter doesn't actually orbit the sun the way that we know it as? Well, this is actually due to a balancing act where a barycenter is located around 7% of the sun's radius from the surface. So this creates a little scale that we see. Jupiter kind of balances the sun's orbit and also its rotation as well. So it's able to have enough gravity, even though it's much smaller than the sun. It has a effect on the sun deeply, and so it stabilizes the sun in an orbit that we all know as a counterclockwise, and it stabilizes the sun's rotation. Let's see. So that's what we call a barycenter. So what was going on in the early solar system? Well, since the orbits weren't what we know it as, it was a chaotic world. So when you had the first hundreds and hundreds of rocky planets, the second gen rocky planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars weren't really planets just yet. They were still just dust and rock that was just scattering around and then coalescing, and then they were born through the destruction. So we're considered the third gen rocky planets. And this is still caused by Jupiter and Saturn's inward-outward migration, Saturn's pulling. But the orbit of the outer planets was a lot different than we know of. See, it was Jupiter, followed by Saturn, planet X, Neptune, and Uranus. Uranus in that orbit 4.6 billion years ago. Well, what happened to planet X was Jupiter and Saturn, the troublemaker of Jupiter and the responsible for end of being Saturn, pulled Jupiter inward to its current position. This probably, the force was so much where it had an effect on planet X, causing planet X to be ejected into high orbit out of our solar system. And this early Grand Tack of the outer solar system. So remember, as you get further away from the sun, Newton's laws don't really apply. So this prompted freely where Uranus and Neptune actually swapped orbits to the current position that we see today, being Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But remember, it was Neptune, then Uranus. And then now it's Uranus and Neptune. It's because planet X's, orbit was altered by Jupiter. So it was kicked out and ejected, and it passed right by Uranus and Neptune at the time. So this promptly shifted Uranus and Neptune into their current orbits today. As the outward migration path of planet X being in a higher orbit, this outward migration of promptly altered the Kuiper belt, including Pluto. And this is why Pluto and these icy bodies that we see in the Kuiper belt have very elongated orbits, and they're tilted out of the plane of the solar system. Famously, Pluto is 17 degrees outside of the plane of our solar system. But also, the altering also causes Pluto to pretty much intersect into Neptune's orbit just enough, and that's why Pluto was demoted as dwarf planet, because no planet, the rules are that the planet must clear its neighborhood, and Pluto doesn't do that because it promptly intersects Neptune's and crosses it, because Pluto takes 248 years to orbit the sun. But this was caused by planet X's outward migration and all the changes that were combined because of Uranus and Neptune's swapping orbits. So current position of planet X today, planet X's orbit is an incline around 15 to 20 degrees, but some models predict it could be much greater, about 40 degrees, right? Mainly around the distance from the sun where gravity is much weaker, because like I said, Newton's laws don't really apply. Because remember, that was the time when Uranus was discovered in 1781 by William Herschel. So what was going on? Because nobody knew how to discover a planet, because Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn were just well known in the night sky on Earth, right? And so 1781, but this actually prompted the discovery into Neptune in 1846. But this was the obsession of looking for planet X ever since that magical year, 1781. So pretty much you were looking at that outer solar system beyond Uranus. They noticed that there was something going on that was altering and shifting, everything in the outer parts of the solar system, because Newton's laws don't apply. That's what they concluded. There must be another planet that was, causing chaos. So 1846, Neptune, the power of math, in a night out showed that there was another planet, which wasn't planet X, but it was Neptune. Neptune was discovered. So years go by until we get into the 18th century. Well, towards the middle. In 1930, when Pluto was discovered, nope, planet X was found. We discovered it. Turns out it was Pluto. So Pluto, so they pretty much said, hey, if we want to discover a planet one day, how much mass does it have? How big is it? Does it have enough effect to alter orbits? Well, they concluded that Pluto was a lot smaller. Because remember, Pluto was discovered, in just a 6-day time lapse. So 6 nights, Clyde Tombaugh took 6 nights, just putting his telescope at an exact coordinates and saying, hey, I see this beam of light right here, and it's in this quadrant, and then we see the second night in this quadrant, third night, blah, blah, blah. It's all different coordinates, right? That was discovered Pluto. Okay? Pluto was discovered. And then, but you have to remember, Percival Lowell actually built the observatory which Clyde Tombaugh used, and Lowell had this obsession to finding planet X. And then Clyde Tombaugh said, hey, I want to use this telescope to make my findings. And then Lowell dies, obviously, and then 1930 was the discovery of Pluto, but it wasn't the answer we were looking for, right? So Planet X, the search of Planet X was still going on and on and on, and it's still going on today, until we discovered Planet Y. And Planet Y, who knows where it is? And then because we found Sedna, We found these planets that were just wandering without a star. We call these rogue planets. We see countless rogue planets just orbiting without a star, just lurking in the outer reaches of our solar system, but it just wasn't the answer we were looking for. Because, well, Planet X receives a lot less sunlight, just about 0.00001% of the sunlight. And that's why it's so hard to see Planet X, because it was that far. Because remember, Planet X takes only 10,000 to 20,000 years to orbit the sun, which, yeah, since the last time it made a complete orbit, Earth was in an ice age. So that's crazy. And then by 2178, Pluto makes its full complete orbit, which is crazy. So pretty much we're in the 250th anniversary of the United States. This was the last time Pluto was, made its complete orbit, when the United States was a brand new country, right? Crazy, crazy. So yeah, that is everything I'm going to say about the Grand Tack and what changed and how can we promptly discover Planet X today. So if we all just knew this evidence right here, because there's a lot more evidence we can see, we can predict between 15 to 40 degrees. If it's tilt, it takes 10,000 to 20,000 years to orbit the sun. We can talk about like pretty much what happened to Planet X. How did that entire orbit change and why is it that far? It was because we had to go all the way back. Or could it be that Planet X wasn't around? It was just part of another star system that was just dying out. So pretty much all these planets became rogue and then spilled into our solar system. Well, that could be another possibility, that Planet X started off with another solar system, but that solar system was short-lived and died. And then these planets were getting set up, and then Planet X was also part of it, and then it spiraled into in that far distance, maybe. But I like to stick more into this generalization that the Grand Tack was happening because of Jupiter and Saturn chaotic trouble. So yeah, and that altered Uranus and Neptune and kicked Planet X into higher orbits because of the combined switcheroo. But yeah, we can see how much of a mess it created in the Kuiper Belt, because it was still a mess, because it brought up that Neptune took out Triton that was originally supposed to be in the Kuiper Belt. Neptune, pretty much pulled it out, but it took a twin with it, and then Triton knocked into its twin and then bonked the other twin who knows where. So who knows, that could be Planet Y. It could be. I'm just making a theory. But hey, that's just theory. A space theory. I don't know what's going with this. I was just making the impression of Matt Pat, because we're talking about theories regarding what happened in the early solar system, combining it with just logic of the game theorist, and I just ignore my cringe. Yeah, 2026. We're in 2026. We're very strong in just setting up some ridiculous memes right now. So yeah, I'll see you guys